Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton, here with Brandon. A couple of things to talk about, not a whole lot in the way of news before we get to the clickbait. Brandon, there has been an update from Bushiroad about how they're distributing PR packs. Can you unpack that for us, please?
Bushiroad posted on Twitter that they noticed that some stores were selling off the PR packs instead of handing them out like they were needed to. So they decided to redefine how they were going to distribute these PR packs. So stores now are able to attach these with sales at the tournament store locations. So like people that are registered to be able to sell these out can then sell them out for the stores that have tournaments in them.
So, functionally, what's happening then is they are shifting the PR distribution model to what they did with HoloLive, which is they're distributing PR packs to people who buy sealed product in store.
And essentially with the tournament store, they're kind of proving that it's a real location because tournaments are able to happen there. So it's trying to help cut out the more backpack sellers from getting PR packs to then turn around and sell.
I get why Bushiroad would want to prevent backpack sellers from getting free PRs to sell. I get that. That makes sense. What does not make sense is putting these PRs behind a further paywall. Like, if the goal is to get these PRs to players through tournament stores, this is silly. Because, first of all, if you're not chasing SPs, buying sealed product is a waste of money, frankly. Because aside from, just the dopamine rush of ripping packs, you are not going to get your money's worth, nor are you going to get everything that you need. Buying singles makes more sense if you're, on a budget. So immediately, people who do not buy sealed product will never see a PR pack. Secondly, this does not prevent stores from selling PR packs. Because Bushiroad is incompetent enough that if you go into your local game store and buy trial decks or boxes or whatever, and then you say, "Oh, can I get my PR pack?" and the store says, "Actually, Bushiroad never sent them to us," or "Oh, they're already sold out because Bushiroad didn't give us enough," or you know, they're delayed or whatever, I would believe that because that's happened so many times before. Bushiroad's been pretty bad, frankly, in a lot of cases at distributing this stuff to stores. So like, there's nothing to stop a store from just saying they're unavailable because they already sold them off and blaming Bushiroad because that's a thing that's happened many times before. It's not like we wouldn't believe that. So, if Bushiroad really just wants the PRs to be distributed to players and not sold by either backpack sellers or by the stores themselves, they just need to print more of them. Just send PR pack upon PR pack with every box and just flood the market with these things so that they're not valuable enough to be ripped and sold. That's the solution. But for whatever reason, they're just going to hide these PR packs behind a paywall, which is just going to further drive up the value on the secondary market because fewer of these things are going to be around because more of them are just going to be sitting behind store counters unopened because, the limited amount of sales that happen in store. And that's just going to drive up the value of these PRs even more so that stores are even more incentivized to just rip these packs and sell them. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. And again, I'm not we talked about this before. I am not a business person, so there might be something here that I'm just missing, but on its surface, this does not look like a solution to me.
Bushiroad's definitely planning on introducing this PR pack for the future as through the sets that have dates all have PR packs incoming. So hopefully that this will be something that can get worked through as it begins to become implemented.
Item number 2 we wanted to talk about very briefly, an update to the errata page. Usually we don't talk about errata page updates because one, there are too many of them to go over every time they happen, and two, most of them are relatively minor, dealing with cards that aren't super important. This one's a little bit more important because it's a cost.
Our band life, I am Mariama, is printed as a 1-0, when it should be a 1-1. It's one of those typical 1-1-7-5 power line standby targets with Encore, but printed is a cost 0. We thought that was worth noting because, one, it's a cost effect, and two, it makes it look more enticing than it may be, especially into non-standby decks. So something just worth noting prior to the next tournament scenes with this PR now out floating about, that it's supposed to be a 1-1 instead of a 1-0.
Yeah, so if you're playing across from someone who's on Bang Dream and they drop this as a 7/5 with Hand Encore for free at level 1, make sure that you get a judge involved. Like, it's possible they don't know. Like, I mean, the card is literally printed wrong. It's not necessarily their fault. But you don't want anybody cheesing out a massive body on board for free against you if you can help it. So, PSA, this is, just your friendly neighborhood Weiss channel, just letting you know that errata exists. And if you see it, don't let them do that to you.
And this is the first time that really like the cost has been affected on on one of these cards since like JoJo from 2020.
Yeah, I haven't seen a mistake this egregious in a while. There was another one where they got the power wrong in this one, but it's on a backup. It's a 4/5 printed backup that should be 2/5. So, like, if you see that, fine. Like, that's probably not going to come down on board as much just because it's a backup. But this card, it's a pretty egregious mistake, and we just wanted to make sure that if you see it, that you know what the card actually is versus how it's printed. So, with those little kind of news blurbs out of the way, let's get to what we actually wanted to talk about today, which is, should Mushoku Tensei, which has dominated the trio circuit this Springfest, get hit by the ban list? Brandon, I'm going to let you have a crack at it first.
With MTI sitting above and beyond all of the other decks in terms of representation on both teams and of all decks total, the majority of MTI being 8 standby in representation, it is far and above the single most represented deck in Springfest top 8s to this point. With that in mind, there has been a lot of talk about whether MTI should get banned. In part, I think, because of how recent the ban list is to English and how new that is and what does that look like going forward. There's been a lot of talk as to whether MTI should be banned. I do not think that MTI should be banned. While it is currently like the deck that everybody compares it to, it's not above and beyond other decks that are topping as well. It is very consistent, and that consistency is really what's one of the things that really highlights strong decks in Weiss, being able to consistently do the effects it needs to do. And with the great selectivity that it has, it puts itself into a great area, but I don't think it is alone in that area.
I agree with you that MTI should not be banned, but I think I disagree as to why. I don't agree with the premise that MTI is somehow not far and away better than everything else, that everything else has a chance to beat it. Mostly just because it's got a representation rate in top 8 that's almost double everything else. It's showing up in almost every top 8 team. And like, that's not an exaggeration. It's 71%. The considerable majority of top 8 teams feature MTI, almost double the next set. I think that is an indication that MTI is too difficult for other things to beat. That being said, I don't think a ban is going to help for a couple of reasons. One is one that we discussed before, and that's ban lists aren't good for a game that's Weiss's size. This isn't Magic. You don't have tens of thousands of cards that can all interact with each other. You have a few hundred cards per set that can interact with each other in their own deck together, right? Like, you can't play DAL cards and MTI cards or whatever together. That makes the environment much more controllable before you go to press. The fundamental issue is that Data Live got printed in the first place. It never should have seen play in English. Just shouldn't have. It was a bad thing to print. It was bad for the game. It destroyed the meta for an entire year plus. That's the fundamental issue here. So, in a perfect world, we don't ever see standby printed in English, because that's the fundamental problem here. Or at the very least, we don't see all these other pieces that make standby incredibly broken. However, we don't live in that world, unfortunately. We live in a world where Data Live exists and has been printed and subsequently banned. So, in the world that we live in now, MTI still should not be banned, even though it is so much better than everything else. Not because other things can actually compete with it, because we see from the data that they can't, but because there are so many other things coming that will make this meta more balanced. Hololive is good. Quintuplets 2 is going to be good. Danmachi has a chance to be good. Seven Deadly Sins is almost definitely going to get a better standby package. Stuff's coming in. We're going to see stuff printed that's going to make MTI less oppressive. My concern is less that MTI itself is going to be broken, and more that we are going to enter a meta that is nothing but standby mirrors. I mean, we're already kind of there, right? With the exceptions of Bang Dream and Love Live Sunshine, everything that's good right now, like really good, is 8 standby. Or at least pretty close. MTI, Slime, Ruby, what Data Live used to be. And now we're looking forward to things like, quintuplets. Everything is going to be a standby mirror, with the exception of a handful of Bang Dream and Rushia decks. Like, that's basically going to be the only exception. And the occasional Love Live Sunshine running around. My issue is not with MTI itself, but with the standby mechanic as a whole.
And that's kind of what I mean by that MTI can get beaten by other decks, is that right now MTI is like the big standby deck, that it is the deck that can get the highest power thresholds on board and keep them alive consistently. So it's like the best archetype of 8 standby currently, recognizing that we're going to get more later.
Like, I am not looking forward to MTI with 12 standby Tokyo Revengers and 12 standby quintuplets and another standby set with a Yoshino in Seven Deadly Sins, not to mention Slime and Ruby. It's just going to be endless standby, with the occasional Bang Dream, the occasional Hololive. But 80%, potentially, of the stuff that tops in singles this fall is going to be very heavily standby based. And that just makes the game worse, frankly. Because a standby trigger, instead of being a +1, is a +3 trigger. When you slam a standby or trigger a standby and can bring a 2/2 onto the board for free, you are not only getting the plus of the card itself, you are also getting the plus of not having to pay the stock to get it on stage. So it's a minimum +1, as long as there is a character in your waiting room, because you can summon anything to board off of it. And it is at maximum a +3. No other trigger can hang with that. And as long as there's any kind of synergy, any kind of powerful profile that you can drop on board, a 2/2 with Hand Encore, and there are a million of those now. A 1/1 Field Swapper, a level 3 combo on a standby trigger that does literally anything, back row support. There are so many incredibly powerful, expensive profiles that standby just summons to board for free. So the issue is not MTI, nor was the issue even Data Live. I had a lot to say about Data Live when it was active in Neo Standard. And I think my frustrations with it were actually kind of misdiagnosed. It wasn't Data Live, it was standby. There are, I think, 2 potential solutions to this problem. One of which is something we've kind of seen before. We would need at least one, preferably more, good sets printed with a specific profile that taxes standby effects. Something along the lines of your opponent has to pay 2 whenever they use a standby effect. If 2 good sets with anti-standby effects were printed in English, that would solve the standby problem. And it wouldn't have to be everything. But if you gave a decent 1k1 deck an anti-standby tech where your opponent had to pay 2 to use their standby triggers, that would immediately force standby decks to have to find a way to play around that tech. And then standby couldn't just gain advantage the whole game by just slamming its climaxes over and over again. That's solution number 1. And I think it's the most viable because we've seen something sort of similar from Bushiroad in the past in Memory Snow. The other option that we have is a lot more drastic and it's going to be a lot less popular. But I think it would solve the problem, is to errata the entire standby mechanic. We've seen this in other card games. Magic did this with the companion mechanic. Lurrus of the Dream Den was just killing multiple formats. So Magic, a couple months after those companion cards were released, errated the entire mechanic and said, actually, instead of just getting this card in your, essentially in your hand for free at the start of the game, or being able to play it for free from your sideboard or whatever, you have to pay a cost in order to get it into your hand in order to play it. And that balanced the mechanic. Personally, I would say that every time you trigger or play a standby, that you would need to pay the cost of the card that you're putting on stage for free. You're still getting a better plus than a salvage trigger because the card immediately goes to board. But at the very least, you'd have to pay the cost of the card. I have for a very long time been against a ban list in Weiss because I think that the solution is to print better cards. And I still think the solution is to print better cards. And the worst thing that Bushiroad could possibly do is to ban MTI after Springfest. Only to then have to ban quintuplets. Only to then have to ban Tokyo Revengers. Only then to have to ban over and over again every new standby set that drops. So to answer the question, no, Mushoku Tensei should not be banned. That's blowing your nose to solve your cold. You're just going to have to do it again. What you need is to deal with the root problem, which is that standby is an overpowered mechanic. It's too powerful. And it's making the game less fun to play. This is not Brandon's take. Brandon does not agree with me on this. This is my take.
Because in many ways, to me, standby, anti-standby, and then that kind of traditional 1k1 decks are in many ways a lot like rock, paper, scissors. Right now, the Trios format favors that standby run. So with Hololive incoming, and there's a couple other 1k1 decks that are like really close to that spot. Like specifically what I'm looking at is like the half standby decks, right? The ones that have the standby mechanic in it, but not necessarily always running it.
Yeah, the Kaguyas, etc.
Yeah, the Kaguya, the Ruby that runs runs whatever level 1 combo they choose, plus the standby top end to try to just step around Mushoku. If you're looking at a singles format, and you know the field is going to be full of a bunch of standby decks, you build your deck accordingly, right? You play the anti-standby tech that allows you to dominate the standby matchups, so you step forward and win.
Are we just gonna play Bofuri memes? Is that our solution? Is that the only deck that we can play if we're not playing standby? Is Bofuri memes? And then just hope we never run into Hololive or Bang Dream? Or, heaven forbid, the Bofuri memes mirror? Like, I hear what you're saying about, like, the rock, paper, scissors stuff. That makes sense to me. I recognize that there are going to be a lot of people who do not want to errata the standby mechanic, and I get that. Short of that, print real anti-standby. Print a card that I can leave in my back row that says every time my opponent uses standby, they have to pay 2. The solution to fixing a meta is not a ban list, but printing better cards.
With that in mind, while we come from two different sides of this coin, we both agree that MTI shouldn't be banned as we looking forward into the future.
Yeah, no, the way I see it, there are 2 solutions for Bushiroad. And, I don't love the change standby entirely solution. I don't love it. I recognize that, if your philosophy is print better cards, if that's, the way that you think that you fix a meta, that errataing an entire mechanic is really drastic, because it is really drastic. But if Bushiroad's not going to print anything that solves the problem, they're going to have to do something else. So they've got one of two options, and I hope they choose one of them. I don't care which one. But Standby is a runaway train. So yeah, thanks for joining us. We'll be back for, less hot takeness on Thursday. We'll have 5 cards, 5 minutes. We're talking about some uncommons and commons from HoloLive. Next week, I will have a deck tech, first time in a long time, and then we'll have some gameplay for that the following Thursday. In 2 weeks, we'll be back with another Clock Talk, talking about all of the tournaments that took place over Memorial Day weekend. There will be a lot to talk about, so be sure to join us for that. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.